my personal experience, I've not so much had a negative experience from my queerness, so much as I have had a negative experience from my Blackness in the Asian communities, and that goes also to incorporate Asian LGBTQ communities. But what I have definitely observed is that the fact that these Asian queer spaces, Asian queer organizations actually exist, then it does show that the wider Asian communities are not including LGBTQ Asians as much as they should, or providing spaces that are brave enough or compassionate enough or welcoming enough for LGBTQ Asians. And to me, I think it goes back more to colonial trauma than anything else, how homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia, biphobia, these are all constructs of white colonial miseducation.
At the end of the day, there's a human behind every question, behind every sentence, behind every situation. But for me, it was definitely hard at first. When I first wanted to get to where I'm at now, back in the day, it was definitely hard to deal with the tension of making sure that we had good grades and making sure that we had to go to medical school. And it was that moment where it was tough, finding that acceptance and making sure that we were able to provide for our families.
Fortunately for me, I felt very little opposition. Where it does come up, and I found this very interesting, very enlightened people that I know who have said, sort of like they're very supportive, they're very pro-LGBTQ, but they wouldn't want their daughter to be a lesbian. And that's today. And that's, so it is almost like, oh, it's okay for you to be that, but I wouldn't want it for my child.
There might be some instances where I could feel that it's different and I will never be number one, okay? Even if I excel on a lot of things that I do, I always still feel like I'm, I will always be the second best, just because I'm a lesbian. But on a bigger scale, I felt like many people look at me as Leslie, as the nurse, and then a leader of Gawad Kalinga, which is a non-profit organization that help the people in the Philippines.
The support of the Asian American community has definitely increased throughout the years. Yet we still have, we still struggle with some of the traditional values. However, for the most part, the door is much more open, and the community, the Asian American community, from my experience, has always been very accepting.
People of my generation and a little older, I think there is a certain sense of, there's a lot more openness in our communities and in our societies, and we, I guess, have to figure out how to cope with that.
Quite honestly, the Asian American community, I think, needs to. It's complicated. I feel like the term Asian American is very much a politicized term that seeks to simplify the nuances that each individual Asian country experiences.
I think in general, the Asian community, we like to section ourselves off. We don't really want to, we're not always going to identify, we don't want to be identified as marginalized. We don't want to be marginalized. We don't like to think about ourselves that way. We like to think about ourselves as we're still super successful, and that's what matters, and that's what's fine, and as long as you can be successful, then you're great. And I think that just really limits us so much. We need to take a look at where we are, because I'm not trying to bash anyone or say or put Asians in general in a box of any kind, But I think in the past, and this has been changing, everything is changing so fast right now. This has been changing now, but I think in the past the Asian American community has been happy to like take a back seat to the social justice movements in this country in particular.
Asian Americans are quiet, they work hard, they keep to themselves. They're the good minorities. And I think we need to get rid of that myth, and we need to assert ourselves as we are Americans, and that part of our Asian Americanness is the queerness in the Asian American community, and that we do not internalize the model minority myth, because that is a very it's a value in which it's a very heterosexist value, and so that needs to shift.
Going back into the question of like, how does the Asian community show up for queer people, or do they even show up for queer people? I think it's very much a case-by-case basis, and I can't speak to any other Asian American culture besides my own, the Filipino American community. Personally, in my own family, I came out as trans, and my dad kicked me out of the house. So that already tells you what like I've experienced, right? However, that did not mean it felt like the end of the world at the time, but now I've come to realize it was pushing me towards the real family that I've always wanted and deserved.
There does need to be a discussion about how Asian communities can be more inclusive of LGBTQ Asians. I think that definitely goes back to how in modern times, a lot of Asian communities are basing their knowledge off of white mythology about how queer Asians or trans Asians should be allowed to exist.
I've learned that love was the answer through this whole situation, and especially being different and not filling the mold for the Asian community, especially like for the older generations, for the families.
So let's think about that. But yeah, like I think that Asian Americans, just the Asian community as a whole, has so much work to do. But I'm here willing to do the work, and there are so many other young people willing to do the work too. And the thing is that it will be ongoing, and we have to be on this mindset of never being satisfied.
But definitely now, I feel that there's been such a bigger embrace towards the LGBTQI community, more so than before. So we're getting there.